welcome to Portage County Matters. I'm Patty Dreier, Portage County Executive. We have a great show in store for this month of November to honor veterans, and I'd like to have you hang with us for just a couple of quick announcements, and I'll introduce our guests from the Portage County Historical Society. We have a citizen appointment available for the South Central Library Board. This is an appointment that's for a 3-year term. The South Central Library Board is a coalition of member libraries offering an exchange of library services for member libraries and patrons. And so we're interested in citizens that express and demonstrate an interest in and expertise in library matters. It's an opportunity for folks to have meetings in Madison. The mileage is paid, and if folks want to attend, the citizen wants to attend by telephone or video, that's an optional way to participate. So if you're interested, I hope that you'll contact the Portage County Executive's office at 346-1997, of course, area code 715. And the other quick announcement at the top of our show related to Veterans Day is that I wanted to promote the American Heroes Cafe in Portage County. It's a cafe at Lincoln Center on the first and the third Thursday of every month on the first floor of the building, Lincoln Center, from 8:30 to 11 a.m. on Water Street. And this particular Heroes Cafe is a gathering opportunity for all police organizations, firefighter groups, EMS personnel, and veterans and their associations to stop in for a visit. The free donuts and coffee and treats and networking and meet and greet opportunities abound there. It's a great chance to make sure that you feel that you're connected to your community, and especially for our veterans to have places to go where you'll be able to interact with your peers and other fellow men and women who have served in our military. So we hope that you'll join into participating in the American Heroes Cafe in Portage County, first and third Thursday mornings of every month at Lincoln Center. All right, now I'd like to turn our attention to my guest today. I've got Tim Siebert and I've got Sue Koehl. And Tim and Sue are very active members of the Portage County Historical Society. Tim's the president. They're both researchers, and we have a really awesome set of projects to share with everybody in our community related to the research that they're doing, the books that are being printed and I'm sure painstakingly edited, related to World War I and the stories that relate to our own community, Portage County. So welcome, Tim and Sue.
Thank you.
Let's start out, Tim, if you wouldn't mind, just the big picture about the project that we're going to highlight here today and why you're involved in it.
About 2.5 years ago, Sue and I got together and decided we needed to do something for the remembrance of World War I. The 100th anniversary comes up next April, and as we talked about all of this, things got bigger and bigger and bigger. So we now have, a series of efforts that we're putting in, publishing. There's a video. We're going to use the park out in Plover, 5 of the buildings in Plover, to exhibit various aspects of what life was like locally for the men who went off and women who went off to serve in World War I, and what it was like back here. We have a speaker series that we're getting through now. We'll be having our second one at the end of the month. And the whole idea is to try to show just how involved Portage County was, to remember the people that were involved in it. And Portage County kind of becomes a microcosm of what the whole country was going through at the time and dealing with in terms of the war. It's amazing how Portage County is very much like the rest of the world, but we've tended to overlook it, or the rest of the country, I should say, but we've tended to overlook it and just kind of brushed it aside because of the involvement with World War II, and try to understand just how impactful World War I was on the world and us in particular, because it really did change things here.
Fascinating, and I've had such a joy. It was so interesting to be looking at the resources that we're going to talk about in this show, Tim. Now, Sue, what about you? What's your connection to all of this research to pull together the stories about World War I for Portage County?
Well, it came from a number of years ago when I was working on another project, and I was doing some research in the archives and came across a collection of letters that Carl Jacobs, who is the son of the founder of Century Insurance, had written to his father when he was serving as a private in World War I. And his father had the handwritten letters transcribed and typed. And Carl Jacobs was an amazing scrapbooker, if you will, and he saved so many things from his various experiences. And in the back of my mind, I thought, someday I'm going to do something about it with World War I. And I called Tim and said, hey, what do you think? And honestly, the project started small in both of our minds about what we were going to do. And the more we researched and kind of made community connections, the more we realized that Portage County has an amazing, amazing story to tell. And like Tim said, it is a microcosm of the experience of the country in the war. And I think by looking at a local level, it helps you understand all of the different currents and feelings that were going on about the war in the period. So it's been fascinating.
And indeed, looking at the resources. So let's share a couple of the resources, and we'll be digging in deeper to all of these things. But for anybody that's listening to Portage County Matters and watching on television, we've got a number of different books. I'll just highlight some of them. So From the Boys with the Colors, Letters from the Great War, World War I, Voices of Portage County. We've got another one, From the Boys with the Colors, Letters from the Great War, World War I, the McCready Brothers. I know you know a ton about the McCready Brothers by now. Then we've got a couple others that I've been exploring that you had offered for me to look at, and that is Songs from the Trenches. And finally, the other one I was looking at was the official recipe book, What to Eat and How to Cook It, from March 1918 as part of the war effort in doing the right thing here in our nation so that we could win World War I. This is really, really interesting, especially for all the foodies out there in our community, and there are a number of them, not just people like me. And then I know you've worked on additional ones, so we'll make sure we get to some of those. But let's talk a little bit more about the books themselves, what you've gathered, and how about, you know, we can take maybe this first one, the Voices of Portage County book, just to zero in on this one.
Okay. The banner from the Boys with the Colors is actually the banner that was used in the Portage County Gazette. So we decided just to use that as the heading for the books. What happened is these young men, and in some cases women, would write home to their parents or friends or what have you, and then those people would in turn give them to the Gazette or the Daily Journal, and they would publish them. So what Sue and I did in just stumbling on these things is to transcribe all of the letters that were written back, and that's what's in these books. And the names, such as Kops and Eagleburger and Hire, are all names that people recognize, names that would become prominent in the community. And the letters are sometimes just fun. Carl Jacobs, for instance, talks about playing a game with bugs, where they put them in a little game-like thing, like a pinball game, and they snap it, and the bug gets bumped around and stuff like that. Or some of them are, Mr. McCready, for instance, was an ambulance driver in the area of Verdun, and his descriptions of that are really unbelievable.
I remember this one on the ambulance driver aspect where he was telling in his letter home, it was like driving between here and Junction City in the middle of the night on dark roads that you didn't know with no light at all. And how two ambulances were actually hit each other in that particular situation, and he was describing all about what had happened then. I mean, seriously, to actually see the words Junction City in a letter about World War I really did hit home for people like me who were reading your books.
And that's the important aspect of it. You know, these aren't just local guys, but they're involved in this worldwide event. And just how they perceived it. These are kids that come from a small town in central Wisconsin. A number of them are rural kids, had never really been out of Portage County to speak of, and here they find themselves in the middle of France. There's castles all over the place. The way people farm is different than the way they farm back here. And it's just fun to read their reactions to this. To say nothing of the conflict itself, but just the circumstances they find themselves in are just fascinating.
So if you wouldn't mind, and if our listeners out there on radio or television wouldn't mind, I did choose one story, one letter, that I would like to share because I think it makes it come alive for all of us that are really exploring what are the value of these resources that you've helped us pull together. So here we go. It's just a one-pager. And this one comes from the Portage County Gazette on August 14th, 1918. And it is written by, it looks like Ed Prudzinski, who is in the Company B, 58th Infantry, 4th Division, quote, somewhere in France. And he had written to members of his family who lived near Polonia. And he's the son of Mr. and Mrs. Joseph Prudzinski and went overseas on the ship Moldavia. And his letter was written on July 6th, then, of 1918. He says, quote, I have received your letters, but I haven't yet had time to answer all of them. I'm going to write one to all of you, this being the first letter since I've been over here. I'll tell you some of the experiences I had coming across. I know you read about this in the papers, so I'll just write about myself. We were all sleeping when the torpedo struck the ship. You know how hard it was to wake me up when I was at home? And even now, I always tell the fellows who sleep with me to awaken me, but that morning, no one had to call me. It's not funny, but it's real. A hometown letter. All right, so back to the letter. It says, from Ed Prudzinski, and in that case, I had to be quick about it, or I would not have had been out yet, as the torpedo struck the section where we were sleeping, and the water sure was coming in fast. I was wet up to my waist before I got out of there, for the stairs was blown out, and I had to look for a beam to grab hold of, which to pull myself up, and then, too, I wasn't the only one trying to get out. Ed Prudzinski goes on, quote, after we got up on deck, we threw our raft over, then followed. The raft is but 6 feet square, and the number of hours was 13. Unlucky or lucky, I don't know which. But I'm thinking it must be lucky, for the raft tipped over with us twice, and still we didn't give her up. The fault was our own that we tipped over, for instead of getting down into the water and hanging onto the raft, we sat on it with our feet hanging in the water. Gee, but that water tasted salty. After we reached the raft the second time, we know how to use it. We weren't afraid of going down to the bottom, for we knew there was no bottom to the place. After the destroyer picked us up, I got down into the boiler room and stayed there till we reached shore. By that time, my clothes were dry. You know what size my shoes I had when I was home for Christmas? Well, I had the same size then. After taking them off, I poured out about a gallon of water out of each one. I had a number of pictures and other things, but everything went down with the ship. Celebrated the 4th of July in Paris. Pete and I were together. There was a big parade and we had a good time, even if we couldn't speak French. I had seen some guns and airships which were captured from the Germans, and a lot of other things which I believe were used before the time of Christ. And the last paragraph of Ed Prudzinski's letter home to the Gazette on August 14th, actually he wrote it on July 6, 1918, is, the country looked something like our own, hills and valleys. The people live, as Father used to tell about, all bunched up in little villages. I don't see any houses along the road like at home, and hardly any fences either. The weather is fine, haven't had any rain since my arrival, and the crops look good. The farmers are cutting rye already. A lot of wheat is raised here, also potatoes and oats. Also saw a little patch of corn. There are two things I have seen in every place I have visited, and those are sparrows and Fords. There it is. That's one of the stories from the Boys with the Colors, Letters from the Great War, World War I, Voices of Portage County, and you helped us bring that forward so we can dig into them, read them, and really be part of their lives. I know I felt like that when I was reading these, Tim and Sue. So tell me about other work here and what you've made as discoveries or
Within the letters
Sure.
books. Well, I think when we were going through them, we had so many letters, and we were trying to decide how best to present them. And we put the two brothers by themselves because they were volunteers and they went and served before the United States entered the war. And we thought their experiences were so interesting, that one being the ambulance driver and the other being an engineer. So we thought it was appropriate to put them together. And where we could, we looked up their obituaries and to kind of tell the rest of the story and then what happened. But in the Voices of Portage County had an all-volunteer cavalry unit, which was called Troop I. And so these guys were larger than life, and they were our local hometown heroes. And so a lot of the letters in the second book, which is the Voices of Portage County book, when their families would receive letters from the Troop I boys, especially the officers, those I think got special attention in the Gazette, and we have many letters from the Troop I men, and many of them are really quite colorful and well-known individuals. So it was really fun. The letter from Ed Prodzinski. We have some that were just one person, but yet they really tell an interesting story of the life and what these men experienced. They were rural farm boys, who had never seen things like, as Tim alluded to, and
before
so
the time of Christ.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's funny to think that he said, just like my father told me about.
Yes.
So, their family history, they might have come from places like that, but their construct was Portage County, and they had probably never been outside the state. And so it's a really fascinating insight. Some saw battle, and those are really heartrending to read, and some never got to the front, and you can hear them wishing that they could get to the big fight. And so it's a real variety of experiences.
Where did you find all the information? Certainly in old newspapers, that's something many of us would be able to go track on, but you went elsewhere.
Well, for these, they're all from the newspaper archives. Mm-hmm. So we spent a lot of time going through reams and reams of microfilm, searching for them. But the other research, we've roamed around a bit.
Yeah.
Like, wasn't it UW-Stevens Point Archives and other places too? You were trying to track the family and their family relationships and all these different kinds of connections.
Correct. And Sue spent some time both down in Chicago at the Polish Museum and at the Veterans Museum down in Madison, where there's a scrapbook that has a lot of this stuff. One of the guy's mothers kept the scrapbook. But we also have letters that have been given to us over the years that we pulled together from various places, conversations with people, and stuff just sometimes just kind of shows up. I was working out at our park a couple of weeks ago, and a gentleman knocks on the door and hands me this whole ream of stuff, which involved a picture of a World War I vet and a couple of letters home. So all of a sudden, this stuff just kind of shows up.
Once they knew you were working,
Yep.
Tim, on the project, then people go and find the old box in the back of the closet.
Precisely.
So anybody who's listening right now, you're not finished with your work. And
Oh, no.
we would very much welcome World War I historical letters and memorabilia, I'm sure, to be able to complement the story.
Well,
I
this
think
book-
the thing one area that we're really, really hoping to get information about from Portage County families is the Polish Army effort. And this is a story that's really not known much in Portage County, and in fact when we talked to Polish veterans groups and Polish heritage groups, they weren't aware of it either. And so if people have family members who might have participated in this Polish Army, and I can tell a little bit of background on it, we would love a photo. We don't have any photos of anybody who was in it. We know names of Portage County men who participated in this army. Basically, Poland at this time was not its own country. It was divided up between the three empires. Polish patriots had a strong longing to become a Polish country again. So they had gotten permission from President Wilson to recruit Polish immigrants who hadn't fully completed their citizenship and who fell outside of the slot limit for the draft. they could enlist in a Polish army, so they would fight under a Polish flag, even though there was no country of Poland. So they trained in Canada and then fought in World War I, and sometimes mostly in France. But then they stayed after the close of World War I and fought for the boundaries of what would be the new Poland. So they didn't come home till 1921. There's very little. We found a lot of newspaper articles in the Stevens Point or Portage County newspapers about it, but then it drops off, and it's like the community memory, because they either died or maybe they didn't come back. And maybe it was reported in the Polish language newspapers of the time, but it's kind of been a lost community memory, and I would love it. When we went to speak with the Polish veterans about this issue, and we showed them the list of the names that we knew so far, and one of the men looked at the list and said, "That's my wife's grandfather," and he was dumbfounded to discover this. So I'm really, really hoping that we'll, uncover some.
The recruitment center for this area of the country was St. Peter's on the north side, Parish. So you have people from northern Michigan and, of course, Wisconsin, various other places that came here to sign up, if you will. So the whole story becomes really fascinating. There's other aspects to Portage County's involvement in the war that I was not aware of, that just, Stevens Point, for instance, passed an ordinance, the dark side here, forbidding...
We've never had any dark side in our community, I'm pretty sure.
They forbid aliens to go downtown. You were not allowed to go downtown if you were an alien, meaning not an American citizen. On the other hand, with the war is declared on a Tuesday, that Friday night, Stevens Point held a huge patriotic parade. It was the largest parade the city had ever seen. 4,000 people showed up, and all 93 cars in the city were in the parade. So you have all sorts of aspects of this that are just fascinating. This small town, central Wisconsin, doing all of this stuff to gear up for the war, and again, the microcosm of the wider American involvement in the whole thing. It's just fascinating reading.
For those of you listening on our radio right now, we have Sue Koehl and Tim Siebert from the Portage County Historical Society, and we want to make sure that we keep interjecting that during the show for anybody that clicks in and missed the introductions at the top end. We're talking about the World War I efforts that we had going on in our community, really, and how you've captured the stories and you're bringing us back to our history as we look ahead to the 100th anniversary of that war, and that will be next April. So I want to ask you about some of the other resources that you've helped to pull together here. This one about the songs from the trenches comes out of Great Britain, and it's full of, wow, vivid language about what trench life would have been like. And some of it takes a humorous look, some of it takes a very serious look about everything from grave digging to who's dead in the trench next to you and how long you have to survive there and so on. And before I read just this simple paragraph about it, one of the excerpts from the book, I wonder, could you tell us, why did you decide to publish this book? For this one isn't coming exactly from Portage County, but to complement your series here.
Well, I stumbled across one of the poems in there in an ad in the Gazette. They used one of the poems to try to sell Liberty bonds. The poem was already 2 years old by the time they used it, but I thought, this is kind of intriguing. Where'd this come from? But the reason we decided to publish it, because it is done by a British captain and is done in 1915 before we get involved in the war, along with the cookbook, was to kind of give an idea of the wider scope of the war. And also, as you said, just an idea of what life was like in the trenches for everybody, not just the British, but later on the American soldiers, the French, obviously. And it's as vivid as anything I've stumbled across to give you an idea of what it was like in those trenches. But again, I just stumbled across it by accident and decided this would be perfect to try to show how that all
so this one, I just happened to flip open to page 14 in the book, and it says, "The Song of the Trench, December 1914." And even just the first couple of lines, before I get to the one I really chose for everybody to listen to on the radio here and on the television. This is the song of the Blooming Trench. It's sung by us and it's sung by the French. You know, just to give you a sense, sometimes they're trying to do some tongue-in-cheek things and other times, as you said, very, very serious. But the one I chose for everybody was this one paragraph. I have recited it to more than one citizen who has stopped in the county executive's office, and I was telling him how excited I was about this show that was coming to feature the Portage County Historical Society's efforts on this history. So here it is. It's called Billets on page 37. It's sung on the march back from the trenches, it says. Back to the billets again, boys, back where the sun's on the wane. Let's drink a bumper and fill it again and again and again. Back from the firing line, boys, to our little gray home in the west, to have what we bally well worked for, a well-earned and jolly good rest. Love it. Oh my goodness. So this whole poetry book is so interesting, and I appreciate you're pulling this together. By the way, these books, all the ones that we purchased out of the county executive's office for me to do a little homework related to this show ahead of time, will all be donated over to the Veteran Service Office. So anybody that's waiting for an appointment with the Veteran Service Officer will be able to have a chance to stop in and peruse the books while they're waiting for an appointment. So that'll be kind of nice. All right, so talk about your other books and the events coming up. We've got about 3 minutes left in the show, and I want to make sure everybody gets that information. Yeah, right. Years of research, but we've got 3 minutes.
Well,
We've got 2 speakers coming up in the next few weeks. We've got the first one is on the Polish Army, Haller's Polish Army in France, and we've got an author coming up, Paul Valasek, and he wrote a book about it.
Just show that poster for those that are watching on television. It's really gorgeous.
So that's going to be, it's free to the public, and it is going to be Saturday, October 29th at the Pineries Room in the library, and 1 o'clock, so I hope you all can make it. It should be a really interesting one. And then on November 30th, we've got Leslie DeBush, and she's a retired professor from the university. And she's going to be talking, well, November 30th, 6:30 at the Lincoln Center.
Lincoln Center, yep.
And she's going to be talking about, she's titled her presentation, Doing Their Bit at the Movies, and it's going to be about how movies helped sell the war in support of the war. On April 6th, we're having our kickoff event at Century, which will, there'll be more information about that later, but it's kind of to kick off the museum exhibit, which will open on that day as well at the Historical Park in Plover. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, we're going to use 5 of the buildings in Plover to exhibit various aspects of life back here, and to try to talk a little bit about what the soldiers were experiencing. The museum itself will be dedicated more to the military side of things. We're going to, hopefully the barn we'll be using to exhibit just what the life was like for these guys, agriculture and the kinds of things that were going on. The depot will be used as a, to say goodbye. So here's a soldier leaving for the front.
Interesting how you'll adapt the heritage.
Yep. And the house, the Franklin house, we're going to be using, 50 men died. Men and women died during the war. So the house is going to be used as a funeral for one of the soldiers whose body was shipped back, which is the way it was done. You didn't have funeral homes the way they do now. The bodies were laid out in the parlor, and that's what we're going to be doing there.
So if folks want to get hold of the books, they can go to your website. So we'll have the website for the Portage County Historical Society on the bottom of the picture here on the show, and if they have other questions about how to get hold of information, I just always welcome people calling the Portage County Executive's office. So Tim Siebert and Sue Koehl, thank you so much for reaching into the archives of our own community's history and bringing it forward to us about World War I. We'll look forward to seeing as many guests as we can out there, as many citizens out there as possible, in celebrating the 100th anniversary. Thank you everybody for joining us.
Thank you.